my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Back in the day, I didn't really care about the system. It was all about survival. It was do or die. I had too many rivals. I was too young and foolish to stay in school. I learned my lessons in the streets. There was not a man.
I want to say a big good evening going out to each and every single one of you right across the globe.
I was swimming.
Kervin, Julien with another edition of Issues Today on World Jam Global Radio.
So sweet. Now things have changed. The whole game has been rearranged. I'm a change.
We take another walk down the wrongful conviction lane.
About being no gangster, life is too short to spend it all in jail. Trying to cope with this.
Well, once again, we have another
my time. I paid for my
intriguing case at hand.
Already get my
case of Peter was Lewick. I hope I'm pronouncing that right.
Already did my time.
We got live and direct with us his private investigator, David Beers.
I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. I was a drug dealer, sold more drugs than Superfly, but I never got high on my own supply. I'm not proud of what I had to do. That's why I'm telling my story to you and you. I had to repent. I must admit, I was doing all kind of stupid shit. Now sit back and think it over since I've gotten older. The life I used to live, I wouldn't do it again.
You know, on a week where
I was a real Forrest Gump, but I was nobody's chump.
Where Walter Scott's killer,
I was the real Terminator, much
who shot him in the back
I'd shoot you up
while he was running away.
Especially all you haters.
The opening statements are going on right now. He could be facing life in prison.
Was met with a hung jury. When we see the innocence of life taken and those that should be held accountable get away with it time and time again, sometimes it makes you wonder just how so many innocent individuals end up convicted of crimes that most people know and believe they did not commit.
Already did my time. I paid for my crime. I'm trying to get this felony off my back so I can get my life on track and have the right to vote and live like an ordinary citizen again. This is my message to all of my friends in the pen, statewide, worldwide. There was not a man I couldn't beat. I was good with my hands and very quick on my feet. I was swimming in women. I had girls all over the street. I was getting money. Life was so sweet. Now things have changed. The whole game has been rearranged. I'm a changed man. Don't need no gun in my hand. It ain't about being no gangster. Life is too short to spend it all in jail. Trying to cope with this living.
We're going to hope that during this show we're going to unravel.
My time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime.
Some of the facts.
My time. I paid for my crime.
That will give you a better understanding as to
I paid for my
how such a tragic accident could end up with a man
but I never got
who, having lost his wife,
I'm not proud of what I had to do.
Has had very little time to grieve,
I had to
as he was quite quickly facing
doing all kinds
a charge of murder.
Now sit back and think it over since I've gotten older. The life I used to live, I wouldn't do it again. I was young and dumb, my brain was so numb. I was a real Forrest Gump, but I was nobody's chump. Me and Billy the Kid had a lot in common. I was the real Terminator, much meaner than Arnold Schwarzenegger. I'd shoot you up and spit you out like a real alligator, especially all you haters. Already did my time, paid for my crime. Already did my time, already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time.
The opening statements are going on right now. He could be facing life in prison.
I've been trying very desperately hard to get hold of Dr. David Ramey. He was floating around in the world of social media earlier on.
Those who trespass against
Quite sure that as soon as we can try and get hold of him, we'll get him back into the show.
temptation, but deliverance from
But
evil.
in a very short time, I want to introduce you to my guest, and it's a private investigator who is responsible for looking into the case of Peter. And maybe David Beers, maybe you can teach us how to pronounce his name correctly.
Yeah, it's Peter Wojciech.
Wojciech, I like that.
Peter Wojciech.
Okay. David, you might just start by just giving an introduction and letting our audience have an understanding of who you are, what you do, and then obviously, finally, why you're here.
Yeah, I'm a licensed private investigator here in New York State. I'm retired from the New York State Police, where I served as a uniformed trooper. Then I worked in narcotics and major crimes. And then I worked in the forensic identification unit before I left state service and went into private practice, switching over to do criminal defense work. And I've been doing that now in the private sector for about 20 years.
Okay, and is Peter's case your first big case, so to speak?
No, not really. I have a lot of them, but Peter's case is kind of an exceptional case. Unfortunately, I did not get involved in Peter's case when it first happened. In my opinion, an investigator should have been consulted in the beginning, but there was not one, and that might have been real beneficial to Peter had that been done initially. He wasn't very adequately represented in the first when it first happened, and ultimately he ended up getting convicted. And it wasn't until the first conviction was overturned on appeal that a new attorney was assigned, and that attorney, took one look at the case and got a hold of me. But now it had been, about 5 years into it.
Okay, so it's just so that our audience have an understanding of what we're talking about here. Let's map this out again so that we have an understanding of what we're talking about here.
Sure.
What is the circumstances that actually led to the death of his wife Patty?
All right, it's probably for your listeners who aren't familiar with the area here. It's a small community in upstate New York. Most people, when they think about New York, they think about the big city, but upstate New York is quite different. This is a very rural community, mostly farming and agricultural, not very densely populated. And this particular case it started on April 2nd, 2002. Peter and his wife, Patty, they had 4 children. And Peter loaded Patty into his truck and the kids and took them down to the babysitters that afternoon and left the kids with the babysitter. And Patty borrowed the babysitter's car to go to work. She worked as an emergency room nurse at a local hospital. And then Peter went on to work. He owned and operated a bar by the name of the Angel Inn, right in the small town where the babysitter lived. So Patty went to work, and she was supposed to get off between 11:15, and then pick up the children on her way home from the babysitters. She had to drive right by there anyway. Well, 11:35 comes, and Peter had gone home early. It was a weeknight. The bar business was slow, so he went home early to wait for Patty. So he went home about 10:30, waiting for Patty, and about 11:30, he gets a call from the babysitter. Her name was Joyce Warden, and she says, "Where's Patty? She hasn't picked up the kids." Whereas Peter explained, that, hey, give her a few minutes, maybe something happened at work. Okay, so she hung up and waited for a while, and another 20 minutes goes by, half hour, and the babysitter calls back. Have you heard anything? No. I'll call you as soon as I do. So now they're both kind of getting worried. Well, a couple minutes later, Patty shows up, but she didn't pick up the kids. So she enters the house, and Peter and Patty start arguing.
Just 1 second. Was there a reason why she didn't pick up the kids? Was she running late or something?
No. Well, she tried to tell Peter that he thought he was going to pick them up, but that wasn't the understanding. And even the babysitter, the babysitter had talked to Patty at work just a couple hours earlier. And it was still the arrangement for Patty to stop and get the kids, and she never did. So we don't know why she didn't stop. But she gets all the way home, and the kids aren't with her. So Peter and Patty argue, and Patty gets mad and runs out the door. And for whatever reason, instead of jumping back into the babysitter's car, she jumps into Peter's truck. Which was right there in the driveway. They live in a rural area. They just leave the keys in the car. So she just jumps in, and Peter had been relaxing on the couch, so he quickly slipped his boots on and followed her out, and he jumped in the passenger side, and they start driving down the hill toward the babysitters, continuing to argue. When they get down to the main road, the county road, it's called County Road 35. It's the main road that leads into the little town of Guilford, where the babysitter lived. So between the road, between the area where they turned onto County Route 35 and the babysitter's house, there's a lake on the left-hand side. It's called Guilford Lake. And as they're driving down 35, Patty rolls down her window partway to smoke a cigarette. Now, this is early April, so it's pretty chilly out. And she lights up her cigarette, and the wind from the open window blew a hot ash into the back of the truck. So she pulls over onto the shoulder and stops the truck and leans through the center console area to check on the hot ash. And Peter does the same thing. And while they're leaning through the console area, Peter could smell beer on her breath. Now Patty was an alcoholic. She had at least 4 or 5 DWIs in her history. She was kind of a closet alcoholic. They were trying to help her, but she'd been drinking that night. So sometime between the time she got out of work and the time she got home, she had stopped for a couple of beers. So that intensified the argument between Peter and Patty, and Peter says, "We are not going to pick up the kids when you've been drinking. Just turn the truck around. We're going home. We'll get the kids later." Well, that made Patty even angrier, and so she yanks the truck over to the like she's going to make a K-turn. She pulls into the top of a driveway, and for whatever reason, instead of putting it in reverse and backing around, she hits the gas. And the truck goes down the embankment, across the grass, and right into the lake. The truck floats for a while, and then starts to sink, starts to take on water. Peter tries to get out his side, but the door is locked. He looks over, and Patty is kind of frozen behind the wheel, but her window is open partway. So he climbs right over her, out the window, and then as he's climbing out, he reaches back and grabs her by the coat collar and pulls her out the window. But then the force of the water or what have you, it caused Patty's coat to pull right off from her body, and he lost grip of her and couldn't find her. And now it's a matter of self-survival. So he gets to the surface. The water is freezing cold. The ice had just melted about a week earlier. so the water is probably only about 40 degrees. He gets his bearings. It's extremely dark out, but he makes his way to the shore, climbs up the shore, and he starts knocking on doors. But these are all seasonal residences, seasonal cottages, and not too many people are there year round. But by the time he knocked on the third door, somebody came to the door. Now this is about 12:30 in the morning. The young man opens the door, and Peter's standing there, dripping wet, just in his stocking feet, shivering, and he asks the young man to call 911. The young man calls 911, tells them what's happening. They got somebody on their way, and then this young man has a friend staying with him, and the two of them go out and they get into their car and drive the short distance down to where Peter's truck had gone in the lake, and they park at the top of the bank, and they get out and they start looking to see if they can find Patty. They send Peter up to the road to flag down the first responders. The one young man runs back to his house, gets a wetsuit and some swim fins and a rowboat, and he brings it back to the scene. By that time, some of the first responders were getting there. They jump in the rowboat. They go out to where the truck is. The truck is about 60 feet out into the water, and it's submerged, sitting on the bottom of the lake about 12 feet deep. But you can see the outline of the truck because the lights are still on. So this young man gets out of the boat, enters the water, and tries to go down to the truck. But he said the water was so cold that it took his breath away, and he had to get out. And he quickly ran home and jumped in a warm bathtub to warm up. So now the ambulances are getting there. The police are there. They're looking up and down the shoreline. No sign of Patty. Peter is placed in the back of an ambulance where they get him out of his wet clothes and start warming him up. In the meantime, a state trooper was overhearing the radio transmissions, and he jumped on the radio and said, I'm a diver. I have my gear with me. Do you want me to respond? And of course they said yes. And he was only about 5 or 6 minutes away. So he arrives, he gets his gear on quickly. He enters the water right in the location where Peter told them that he had lost grip of Patty. The diver finds Patty almost immediately lying on the bottom of the lake. He brings her to the surface in a bear hug. And the first responders are sitting in the rowboat over the truck. So they help put Patty into the rowboat and bring her to shore. They get her on the shoreline, and they start attempting to resuscitate her with CPR, and they're trying to intubate her to establish an airway. And while they're doing this, water is coming out of her mouth, and they can smell beer. They continue CPR. They get her in the ambulance, and they continue CPR all the way to the hospital, which is about 20 minutes away. And shortly after she arrived at the hospital, the emergency room doctor pronounced her dead within about a minute after her arrival.
Here's the thing for me, David. Right? Let's take her alcoholism out of the equation. Let's take the arguments out of the equation. Let's take what took place prior to that, the reasons for their journey. Let's take everything out of the equation for a minute, and let's just look at the sole issue of what took place once the car hit the water. Is Peter's behavior, right, and his response to what took place the moment the car hit the water, bearing in mind the fierce coldness of it. In fact, let me ask you one question before we go. Well, did Peter have any training in deep sea diving or underwater? Did he have any training of that sort?
No.
Okay. So bearing in mind he's an average Joe, right? Who's now faced with this situation where the car's gone underwater, and is anything that he did abnormal?
No. I mean, under the circumstances, I think he was lucky to have survived himself.
And is there categorically proof and evidence that he actually was in the water as well?
Yeah, absolutely. All the witnesses who were there when it first happened, when he first came out of the water and they saw him, they all describe him as dripping wet, soaking wet, head to toe, shivering profusely, talking like he's in shock and not making sense. So those are things that you would expect when somebody had just experienced something like that.
So there you have it. You just taking away all of these other circumstantial issues and looking at the accident as it took place, the car hitting the water. David's behaviour and conduct is consistent with someone who was in an accident.
Sure.
And then, because I mean, in my first thoughts, I'm thinking to myself, he's got out of the water and he's headed to go and knock doors. And by the time he's actually got help, surely in his mind's eye, you'd already believed to yourself that Paddy would have been past it already. No way would you have been able to survive for that long underwater unless she's managed to make her way out.
Right.
Okay. Now, is there any reason whatsoever to explain why Patty was unable to help herself at that time? Because, okay, he's tried to grab her coat, the coat's come off, but what was wrong with her instincts in responding to the circumstance and maybe trying to swim out herself? Had she banged her head? Was there a loss of consciousness? Can you explain any of that for us?
Yeah, well, there was, first of all, Patty was very petite, very frail. A lot of that, I think, stemmed from the alcohol problem. And we learned from some witnesses who said that Patty had a fear of the water as well. Peter himself told us that, Patty, if she was just walking along the shoreline wading in the water, she'd have a life vest on. She just had a fear from the water. So Peter's description of her freezing behind the wheel kind of made sense, and that she just didn't know what to do or how to do it. And I think that her fear of the water and the fact that she panicked, I think, had a lot to do with the fact that she was unable to get out herself.
I'm going to give a totally non-relevant circumstantial issue that might just give some of our audience a bit of an understanding. I had an issue when I was a child, going to a swimming baths, and I nearly drowned, and I was about 8-9 years old, and I had a tremendous fear for water ever since. So for me, swimming was one of the things that I never really did, and I've only just managed to do over the last few years. But I was on holiday with my children back in the 90s sometime, and we went to one of these splash pools where they have all these various water rides, and one of them was a Super Bowl where you go down this chute and it dumps you in just 10 feet of water. Now I'm 6'2". It dumps you in 10 feet of water, having swirling you around a bowl, and it dumps you in this water, and then obviously you bounce up, you spring yourself out, and you get out. But I'd never been in water that deep in my entire life. But I was with my children. My children wanted me to go on this ride, and I wanted to play brave, so I did. And I went down the chute. It swirled me around, and it dumped me in the water. And we're only talking about something that's probably about 8 to 10 feet wide in its diameter, and 10 feet deep. So we're not talking about a big lake or a sea. We're just talking about a little splash pool fill. But I froze. I froze, and my 10-year-old son at the time, who was better equipped at swimming than I was, actually jumped in and pulled me out.
Yeah.
And I was told that had I just put my foot at the bottom and pushed up, I would have been able to come to the surface. But I couldn't get myself to do that. I couldn't think of what it was that I should be doing or was supposed to do. And I froze. And had my 10-year-old son not come in the water and got me on that particular occasion, only God knows what would have happened next. So I can totally identify with Patty freezing behind the wheel in a circumstance if she had a real fear for water, because I had a real fear for water. So I can resonate with that. So on that note, there's Patty frozen to the steering wheel, and Peter's come out the window, tried to grab her, pull on the coat, but she's stuck fast or steadfast, and so that coat's just come with him, and he's come away. But bearing in mind he has no training experience, he has no special skills or resources to be able to allow him to stay underwater for any length of time. He's got no breathing equipment or anything else. Natural survival kicks in, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Your instinct for you to survive will kick in. So he's going to try and get some air, and then once he's got some air, try and think of what to do next. But I would imagine, with the water being as cold as it was, surely his whole body would have been getting close to shut down itself.
Yeah, he was probably just a few moments away from some pretty severe hypothermia. And if he had re-entered the water, he would have put his own life at risk.
And anybody who lives in that sort of area, that sort of environment, with that sort of surroundings, would be fully aware of the dangers that these types of water, and no doubt, accidents are the type of thing that would have happened in places like that on numerous occasions, where warnings would have been given and signs would have been there to be careful, etc. So he'd have been aware that would have been not the wise thing for him to do without any proper help and support, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So his first instinct, once he got out of that water, despite the condition that he was in, was to go and get some help.
Yeah, and then he was trying to seek help for Patty.
Right. And once he got that help, he returned, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so talk us through what happens next then.
All right. As the police and the EMTs arrive, both Patty and Peter are taken to the hospital in separate ambulances. Peter
By the way, just on that, at that precise moment of time, she has not actually been determined as dead.
Correct.
Right.
And now that you've made that point, it kind of leads into the next issue, because while Peter's in the back of the ambulance warming up, a sheriff's deputy gets placed in there with him to try to talk to him and find out what happened. And what Peter told them is part of the problem that led to him getting himself put in this position. But when you understand the reason he did this, it really makes sense. But Peter told the deputy that Patty had swerved to miss a deer, and in so doing, she went down the bank and into the water. And the reason Peter told them that was because he knew Patty had been drinking, and she already had several DWI arrests in the past, and he didn't want her to get arrested again. So he was protecting her from possibly getting arrested again. So he lied to the police about what actually happened, and that was kind of the turning point for the police at that time, knowing that the evidence that they found at the scene did not support that story.
But here's the thing, right? You've just been in an
Yeah.
accident with your wife. Prior to that, you have total knowledge, right? Because that was what you was arguing about, that she'd been drinking. You're not going to turn
Yeah.
around to the police officer, right? Whether it be in a police car or in an ambulance, and say, "Oh, by the way, the reason why we were arguing was that she'd been drinking, and that's why we crashed, because she'd been drinking." You're not
Yeah.
going to do that, are you?
No. I don't know anybody who would volunteer that type of information right up front.
So what he's trying to do is he's trying to throw them off the scent, in the
Yeah,
hope that because
yeah.
he's not aware that she's dead yet. There's been
Right.
no certified confirmation that she hasn't survived. So at that point, what he's trying to do is throw them off the scent, so they're not going to get into deeper trouble than they might already be in.
Yeah. And that, like I said, that's what led the police to believe that there was something more involved than what he was telling them. Even though it was a tragic accident, they ended up turning it into a murder. So that was quite a leap on their part, and they really didn't have the evidence to support that. But anyway, backing up, Peter and Patty are taken to the hospital in separate ambulances. Patty gets there first. The ambulance Peter was in actually stopped at the babysitter's house so they could check on the kids. And while he was there, the babysitter gave him a change of clothes from her teenage son, so he could have some dry clothes to wear. And then they continued on into the to the hospital where they could check out Peter. He had a mild case of hypothermia. And once he warmed up, he was fine.
And that obviously was confirmed by the hospital that he had a mild case of hypothermia.
Yeah.
Which meant that is the confirmation that he was actually in the water with Paddy.
Yeah, well, everything supported that. I mean, his clothing was soaking wet. And all the witnesses that saw him, the young man who called 911, him and his friend and his girlfriend all saw Peter standing there in the doorway, dripping water onto their floor. So he was definitely in the water.
Okay. So please, before we go any further, let's look at what is the definition of murder as is legislated in the courts of law in the United States of America. What constitutes murder?
When you knowingly, intentionally cause the death of a person.
Okay. So when you knowingly and intentionally cause the death of a person, right?
Yeah. If you intend to cause, and then cause the death.
Okay. So that's like an intentional, right? You purposed. You purposed,
yes.
Right?
Yes.
But if you, for example, if you had a gun and you wanted to kill somebody, right?
Yeah.
You wouldn't point the gun at your stomach in order for the bullet to go through you to hit the person behind you, would you?
I wouldn't think so.
Right? So if your intention was to kill that person, then you would do it in such a way where harm would befall them and not you.
Yeah.
Is that a good understanding so far?
It is.
So, at what point would they consider, even and I'm really being I'm going over the top here, even if you was to take into consideration they were in a full-blown argument, fighting over the steering wheel, even.
Yeah.
Which caused the vehicle to come off the road and hit the lake. How would even that be conceived as murder?
I wouldn't. Possibly manslaughter in that situation, but that's really not what happened.
No.
Patty
I'm only trying to break things down for a minute. I mean, even if that was the worst case scenario, the most that they could have come at him with was manslaughter, right?
Yeah, because it would be a reckless act, not an intentional one.
Okay, so that's the differentiation between murder and manslaughter, is that with murder, it's a willful intention to cause the death of and then kill your intended victim, right?
Yeah.
And manslaughter would be by way of accident, right? Unintentional.
Correct. A reckless act, yeah.
Right, but death was still the result. So, because I'm trying to work out at what point that they would perceive his actions, bearing in mind that his own life was put at risk. How would they perceive that to be murder?
Well, they came up with a pretty bizarre theory.
So tell us what this theory is, because I'm dying to hear.
Yeah, the police theory in this case was that. I got to back up a little bit. After Patty went to the hospital, her body was released for an autopsy the next day, and during the autopsy they found these little burdocks in her hair. I don't know if you have burdocks in the UK or not, but they're a little prickly thing that grows like a thistle on a branch.
We probably might have it, but under a different name, because we have stuff like that, but it'd probably be a different type of tree and a different type of, because of our climate.
Yeah, they're very common. They grow in the wild, especially around areas where there's water, creeks, rivers, streams, lakes, what have you. So she had some of these in her hair and on her clothing. So the police, they went to the scene, and then they don't find any of these little burdocks in the area. So from that, they conclude that something must have happened someplace else.
But we know something did, right? Because Patty, between the time that she left work and the time that she got home, had stopped off somewhere to drink.
Sure. But the police get a search warrant for Peter's house and his property, and they go up there and they do their search, and they're looking for diaries. They had some witness that said that Patty kept a diary, and so they're looking for her diaries. And they found some writings, but there was nothing there that could be interpreted as anything that would give Peter motive to kill her. But anyway, the police theorized that Patty had come home from work. No, actually, they theorized that Peter had picked her up at the hospital in his white GMC pickup truck, took her home, fed her, forced her to drink beer, then took her out behind the house, behind the family swimming pool, which was just an above ground pool about 60 feet behind the house. And he assaulted her and pushed her into this burdock bush where she got the burdocks on her hair and on her clothing. And then he suffocated her and dragged her over to the white pickup truck, put her into the bed of the truck, drives her down to the lake, stops at the top of the lake, gets out, puts it in gear, closes the door, and lets it ride into the lake. And then he goes down and jumps in the lake to get wet. That's their theory.
That's an interesting theory.
And it doesn't make sense. Even if he had killed her, why would he put her in the bed of the truck and not the cab of the truck? I mean, it would be a kind of a dead giveaway, don't you think?
Yeah. Okay. So that's this. They have this theory. Now, let's pause that there. What I now want to do is I want to go back again now. I want to go back because I want to get an understanding of of who Patty and Peter were as individuals.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
tell us a bit more about Peter. What was it that he did? What did he work? What did he work as? And what were they like as parents? Or what were their children like?
Yeah. Peter was early in their marriage. He was an over-the-road truck driver. I mean, he did quite a bit of that, and then he bought and opened this bar right there in town, and he became a bar owner, and the business was actually quite successful. They were doing well financially. All their bills were paid. Patty, I believe it was her second marriage. She had an abusive relationship prior to that. And she had a son with her first marriage, and then they had two or three children together, and lovely cute children. I mean, they're older now, but the oldest one was only about 7 or 8 at the time. But Peter, there was a lot of people in town that really didn't like Peter. He was very outspoken, a little arrogant. And that was part of the problem. People were willing to testify against him just because they didn't like him. But there was really no evidence of any domestic abuse prior to this happening. So there was
and that's important, right? And I'll tell you why that's important. Because you're talking about a woman who had a known history of alcohol dependency. She'd also been a closet drinker, so she'd actually been drinking in secret as well. She had several DUIs. And yet, even with some of the disagreements that they would have had, none of it ever led to anything becoming physical enough that law enforcement were called, or there's any recorded history of domestic abuse. Now, have the children ever suggested that there might have been any physical abuse between the two?
No. The oldest child was probably the most reliable at the time, because she was about 7 or 8, and the other ones were real little, so they wouldn't have known. But the oldest one, Ashley, was she was very adamant that Dad was never abusive to Mom.
And let me tell you this: 7-year-old girls, they know. My daughter, my youngest daughter, is 8, and the one thing that she can do is that she can tell you about different feelings, emotions, arguments, and even
sure.
There ain't no relationship that doesn't have a disagreement, but when me and my wife have a disagreement, my daughter will just leave the room and go downstairs, and she's 8, and then if it gets noisy, she'll just come upstairs and say, "Can't you two just shut up," or something quite similar, So if you've got a 7-year-old child who's lost their mother, and yet is still standing there purporting to say that they witnessed, they saw, and they didn't evidence any form of physical abuse or violence, bearing in mind we're talking about a woman who had a known history of alcohol abuse and dependency, which would have been problematic for their relationship.
Sure,
right.
It was a problem, and in fact, there were other witnesses who told us that Patty would hide beer or whatever alcohol she could find. She'd hide it out in the bushes or in a ditch someplace, and then go there when
which would tell you where she got these bushes in her hair and her coat from.
Yeah, very very well could be. Yeah. Well, we actually believe there was burdock bushes growing at the scene where the truck went in. Okay. So, and we think the truck just hit the bush, and because of the bushes would have been dead from the prior year, and so they're brittle, and they just kind of went flying out into the water, and during the rescue effort, they just started sticking to things.
Yeah. And even that, but it seems like, bearing in mind you've got two individuals who, with 3 children together, there was a commitment.
Yes.
There was a commitment to a long-term, lifelong relationship.
Yeah. The children were well taken care of, neat, good hygiene, well educated. They were doing a good job raising their family.
And that's irrespective of him having to cover for, because I would have imagined that he would have to have covered for her on numerous occasions when she'd gone over the top, where she'd been drinking when she shouldn't have been drinking, when they had company and he didn't want to be embarrassed, with company either at home or when they'd been out visiting. So he must have loved her a great deal to have put up with what she was dishing out on a daily or a weekly basis, and for him to have to cover up for her all the way through that.
There's another great example of their love. Peter prepared for Patty's funeral, and believe it or not, it was an open casket funeral, even though she had gone through an autopsy and organ donation. They prepared her body for an open casket funeral, and on the last day of the viewing, before they closed the casket, I got to back up just a little bit. Peter, at the time, had this long ponytail, braided ponytail that went down like to the middle of his back. He'd had it for years, and he told us that Patty loved it, and we learned this from the babysitter that at the funeral, when they were getting ready to close the casket for the final time, Peter cut off his ponytail and put it in the casket with Patty.
There is evidence here of a love that's romantically purer than the picture the law enforcement would try to paint.
Yeah, for sure.
Because anybody that's lived with anybody that's abusing any form of substance or liquid or fluid, alcohol or whatever, there has to be a real genuine love for that individual to tolerate the behaviors that come with those dependencies and addictions.
Oh, sure.
Had they ever tried to seek help from counseling or rehabilitation for her alcohol dependency?
I think there was some counseling for Patty because for a while there she was taking some type of drug that would react negatively if she were to consume any alcohol. I can't remember the name of it, but and there were people that knew that and were trying to make sure that she took her medication regularly. So, she had actually gotten fired from a prior nursing job because of her drinking problem. They wrote it up as sleeping on the job so that she could still seek employment elsewhere. But that was what was behind it.
So with Patty being dependent on alcohol, is there any... let me rephrase that. Most people who have a dependency or an addiction, it's normally a mask to hide some other deep-rooted pain or issue that they've struggled to come to terms with. Has any evidence ever come out of why she was alcohol dependent? What was it that she was living with or uncomfortable about? What was it about herself that she didn't like that had her doing this to herself, irrespective of the fact that she had a lovely family, wonderful children, and a husband that loved her?
Yeah, I think it may have stemmed back to her prior relationship. I can't remember if it was with a husband or her father, where she experienced some physical abuse. So maybe she just had trouble coping with that and was never able to get over it. I don't know.
Well, because that rings true and that resonates. I do a lot of work with drug addicts and alcoholics in general, and I have done for years. I do a lot of support work in that area here in the UK, so I'm fully aware of the behaviours and the tolerance levels that come with that. So I'm really trying to get a picture of the type of man that Peter must have been. He must have known that she had an issue, because you don't get close to somebody that close, intimate, without being aware. And did Peter have an alcohol issue himself?
No.
So
not at all.
So the smell of alcohol would have always been prominent to him, because see, it's like a smoker. I don't smoke, so the moment anybody that is smoking and they're around me, I smell it strong. They don't smell it because it's their natural habitat. That's what they normally smell around themselves.
Yeah.
So they won't even smell the smoke that's in their clothing or that's coming off their bodies. But
back to Peter. He ran a pretty tight ship at his bar. He wouldn't allow the bartenders to serve anyone who was intoxicated. In fact, the very night this happened, before he went home that night, they had a patron there that had too much to drink, and him and another coworker took her home. So that's just how he is. He didn't want her to drive home in her condition, so he made sure she got home safely.
But on the other hand, just to support that, the fact that he was a proprietor of a wine bar or a club, a licensee, so to speak, because I'm not sure if the legislation is the same in the States as it is here. In order for you to serve alcohol, you have to have a license, and you're also accountable for those that are frequenting your residence. So, for example, a pub landlord here in the UK can find himself up on charges if he knowingly continues to serve alcohol to somebody who he knows is going to get behind the wheel of a vehicle.
Sure.
So
same here.
So therefore, it's something that Peter would have had to have dealt with on a daily basis. The potential of having to turn around and say to somebody, "I can't serve you anymore because you're going to be driving," or "You've had enough. I can't let you get in that vehicle." So for him trying to remonstrate with Paddy about her drinking and driving, and he didn't want her driving, let's just turn the thing round and go home. That is totally understandable based on the type of person he was, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It makes total sense.
Okay. So now we have a father and a husband who has a deep-rooted care for his family and his family connection. He supported his wife, tolerated the behaviours, as uncomfortable as it may have been at times. And on this occasion, he was trying to be assertive and put his foot down. You've had too much to drink. You need to stop. But still, even in battling that, he was still trying to protect her and defend her when he was sat in the back of an ambulance by trying to create an alternative story in order to throw the police off the scent, that they wouldn't go and immediately investigate and maybe, take a blood sample or a breath test from her. At this precise moment in time, which would have bought her, had she not passed away, it would have bought her some time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they did test her blood at the autopsy. She wasn't legally intoxicated, but her blood alcohol was like 0.05.
So she had alcohol in her system.
Yeah.
Okay.
So sometime between getting out of work between 11 and 11:15 and then arriving home around midnight, she consumed some alcohol.
And we're only talking about a 45-minute window here, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Now, so at this point, you have a man who must love his wife, for him to have had to have tolerated and supported her dependency. They've got 3 wonderful children together that love them dearly, that they also obviously reciprocated that love.
Yeah.
And even in the heat of the arguments being based around she had had a drink on her way home from work, and it would probably be best if they just turned back and she didn't drive.
Yeah. Yeah,
What-
but probably go ahead.
I'm just wondering what else could they have possibly deemed to have been significant enough, an issue, to have prompted this man, knowing all of this, to have wanted to take it that step further and wantingly, intentionally planning to kill her.
Yeah, there was just no real motive ever established. They tried to bring in some witnesses to say bad things about Peter, but there was really nothing credible that they offered. So
they never produced a motive.
no,
Okay, that's very interesting, though, isn't it? Because
not a viable motive for sure. In fact, the interesting thing about this case, Kervin, is when the medical examiner did the autopsy, his initial findings were probable drowning, and later, after, and this really kind of blew me away, because of that whole issue with the Burdocks and their theory that he killed her up at the house first. The medical examiner kind of went along with that and changed his findings to asphyxiation by suffocation.
on what grounds?
None. There was no. Actually, he conducted a second autopsy. Her body was still available after the funeral, so the district attorney got a court order to have the body sent back for a second autopsy. He deliberately looked for signs of suffocation. Looking at the hyoid bone and the petechiae in the eyes and the neck and the tongue, and he found absolutely nothing to support any medical evidence whatsoever to justify changing his findings. But yet he changed them anyway. And then on the other hand, Peter and the babysitter, Joyce, after Peter got arrested, Joyce actually consulted with a forensic pathologist and asked him to take a look at the case. And he did so pretty much pro bono. And he totally disagreed with the medical examiner that did the autopsy, and he said that this is clearly a drowning. But unfortunately for Peter, his first attorney never called that medical examiner to testify at the first trial, and I was just kind of dumbfounded by that.
But you would be, wouldn't you? Because you'd have imagined.
Yeah, I mean,
anything that was credible that could defend your clients, you'd have to include.
Yeah, and the medical examiner that they consulted with had a great deal more experience than the one who did the actual autopsy. So his credentials and qualifications and experience far exceeded the one who actually did the autopsy, and yet they never called him.
Okay, let's just go back a bit. What was Patty like? What work did she do? What kind of lifestyle did she live?
Well, she was a registered nurse. She worked at the hospital in the emergency room. All of her coworkers liked her. Had nothing but good things to say about her, even though they probably knew she had some issues with alcohol. A lot of them weren't willing to admit that, but overall, she was a good worker, a good mom. She did help out at the bar with the business operation part of the bar, and all indications were that her and Peter had a very good relationship.
I could only imagine for somebody to have spent that time with her, having 3 children, supporting, tolerating, and being there in a relationship. He must have loved her. So, at what point did Peter actually get arrested?
Yeah, that's a good place to start. In the days that followed, the police were doing their investigation, and when Peter was making arrangements for Patty's funeral, the funeral director had asked him if Patty, she had any jewelry, that they could use for the viewing, and the police had custody of most of that stuff because it had been taken off her body when she died. So they called up the police department and made arrangements that Peter could come and pick it up, and they would give it back to him. So he went over to do that, and while he was there, the police wanted to interview him some more about the case. And so the lead investigator sat down with Peter and had him go through his story again. Of course, at that time, Peter was still insisting that Patty had swerved to miss a deer. And of course, the lead investigator, by this time, had some pretty good information that wasn't true. So he started challenging Peter, and things went downhill pretty quick when he started making accusations. And the problem with the lead investigator, him and Peter had clashed on a prior occasion. So they didn't like each other to begin with. And so when Peter started getting accused, Peter got rather verbal, and the lead investigator didn't like that. And I think that's when he
made an enemy of the one man that he didn't need to at that moment in time.
Yeah, so he did. Ironically, Peter and the lead investigator have very similar personalities. So they're a little outspoken, a little arrogant, and they clashed. And that didn't work out well for Peter. And so then they did about 3 days later, I think it was, they did another search warrant up at Peter's house, and they discovered some burdock bushes up there, and one of them had a couple of hairs stuck to it out by the pool. I still challenge the finding of those hairs because when they found them during the search warrant, they took a couple close-up photographs, and you can clearly see 2, possibly a third hair in those close-up photos. But what's interesting is when these hairs get sent up to the state police laboratory, there's 18 of them. And
It's 18.
18 hairs, because we have the notes from the lab examiner, and she counted 18 hairs, and of course 2 or 3 of them, were positively identified as Patty's through DNA. But interestingly, one of them had an allele, an odd allele that didn't belong to Peter or Patty. And I don't know how that happens, because you can only get DNA from the root of the hair, and how there could be an odd allele on there is beyond me. But that always kind of disturbed me, that those 2 or 3 hairs somehow multiplied to become 18. And then continuing on with the hair evidence, after the truck got pulled out of the water, it got impounded, and the police went through it, inventoried it, took pictures, crawled through it, taking measurements, and as part of their accident reconstruction, they had a mechanic look at it for mechanical failures, and they never found anything of value in the truck. But then about 3 weeks later, for some reason that was never explained, they called in a forensic team from another county to come in and do a forensic exam of the truck. And lo and behold, they find 2 hairs in the bed of the truck, and one of them matches Patty. But what's suspicious about that, Kervin, is the timing. This truck was examined on the 23rd of April that year. So we're talking, it's about three weeks after the accident took place.
So was there any explanation given as to why there was such a long time delay between the initial?
No, because their own people had already gone through the truck and they didn't find anything. But what's interesting, on April 22nd, just the day before, the lead investigator and the district attorney are at a meeting with the forensic pathologist who did the autopsy. And when he had done his second autopsy, at that time he took some controlled hair samples from Patty's scalp. He just pulled out a bunch of them, put them in a plastic bag, and held on to them. And so on the 22nd of April, when the lead investigator and the district attorney are there, he turns that evidence over to them. And it was the very next day that the 2 hairs show up in the truck.
Wow. Okay.
So that kind of jumped out at me.
But it would jump out, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I mean, if you consider what that truck went through, for the submersion into 12 feet of water, the force of the water coming into the bed of that truck, and then the reverse taking place when it's pulled out. How 2 hairs could have survived that type of force of water is beyond me. They claimed that the hairs were stuck in the burrs of the bed liner, and that's why they were still there.
Okay, so.
But even that, Patty drove that truck on a regular basis. Finding her hair in there wouldn't have been all that unusual.
And that's the thing, because the owners of that vehicle, who regularly babysat for him, actually has confirmed that it wasn't the first time that Patty had used their vehicle.
Right.
Okay.
And then the other thing, their theory was that Peter had picked Patty up at the hospital in his truck. Well, if that was true, then
how did that car get out there?
Then Joyce's car should have still been in the hospital parking lot.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the lengths that people will go to when they're ready to start fabricating evidence to murders in order to make something look like what it isn't, is far beyond our imagination. But in trying to turn this accident into a murder, are they not making fools out of the justice system?
Well, in my opinion, yes. I mean, and I think they actually, I hate to say it because I ordinarily have a lot of respect for the police, but in this particular case, there's a lot of things that are very troubling for me, and I have reason to believe that misconduct was involved in their effort to make a case against Peter. Another bizarre thing that happened, Kervin, was the going back to the scene at the lake. The same diver that found Patty later that morning, they decide to pull the truck out of the water. So the diver gets suited up again, and he goes down there with a connection with a winch, a cable with a winch on it, and he while he's down there, he's going to hook it up to the truck so they can winch it out. While he's down there, he kind of looks in the truck and he's looking around, and on the lake bottom he sees a coat, So he goes down and grabs it and picks it up to make sure there wasn't a second person. But then he just left it there, knowing that in a couple minutes they're going to winch the truck out right over it. And I could never understand why he would just leave a piece of evidence like that on the lake bottom.
You just wouldn't, would you?
No. But anyway, the story gets a little more bizarre because after he comes out of the water, he tells a couple of the deputies about the coat. But they wait 4 days before going back and sending another diver down to recover the coat. And the diver that recovered the coat claims he had no knowledge that the coat was there. He was just down there looking to see what it was like down there and documenting what the lake bottom and the vegetation looked like. And while he was down there, he just by chance found this coat.
So you know why this investigation was going on? Where was Peter all this time?
Well, until April 8th, which was 6 days later, he was taking care of business. He was taking care of the funeral arrangements, and then attending the funeral. I think the funeral was on the 6th and the 7th. The viewing was on the 6th and the 7th, and then Patty was scheduled for cremation on the 8th, but for some reason we don't know, it got delayed. And then they got the court order to re-examine the body, so that was delayed further. But on the 8th, that same day, the 8th, was the day that the police did their second search warrant up at Peter's house and then arrested him later that same day. So he's been in custody ever since April 8th, 2002.
So he kind of had around about 4 days or so, 6 days, to absorb the loss of his wife, grieve, comfort his children. We obviously had 1,000,001 questions to answer. Did they have any external family members, siblings, for example? Did Patty have any brothers, sisters? Was the mother and father still alive?
Patty had some relatives. They were kind of estranged. They didn't get along well.
Was that because of her drinking?
That was part of it. I think there was also some issues about her the one son that she had from a prior relationship, and she just did not get along well with her family. There was a custody battle over her son. So she had distanced herself from them. Peter, on the other hand, his mom and dad lived right across the street from him.
And what is the picture that Peter's mom and dad paints about Peter and Patty?
Yeah, I mean they didn't see any signs of domestic abuse, and they were involved with Peter and his family and the grandchildren on a regular basis. So there was no indication from them whatsoever that there was any problem between Peter and Patty, other than Patty's drinking problem. They were aware of that.
But you see, because this is quite intriguing for me, because of the circumstances that we're facing, and you've now got Peter in prison for her murder, you'd have expected his parents to start condemning and criticizing her past and her behavior in order to try and paint their son to be a little bit better.
No, other than talking about her problem with alcohol, they didn't have anything else negative to say about her.
Point exactly. I'm saying that you'd have expected them to start trying to throw some mud, hoping that some would stick, in order for their son to look better. The fact that they haven't shows that there was a real love between those two, in spite of whatever shortcomings they might have had in in being able to deliberate and contextualize how they felt about certain things that was going on in and around them. So
Yeah.
I'm not getting a sense of somebody who needed to get rid of his wife.
No, absolutely not. And unfortunately, yeah, Peter's mom and dad were both real supportive. His mom passed away after the first trial, but his dad is still around, but his health is failing, and he's tried desperately to continue to support his son, and he still does. But it's taken a toll on him, and the stress has really aged him and taken an impact on his life.
Do you know, the more I get to hear about Peter is it's such a sad story that we're hearing, because this has all the hallmarks of a tragic accident gone wrong, terribly wrong.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. And they turned a tragic accident into a murder. I mean, and it's not. Their theory just falls apart no matter how you look at it.
Okay, so let's take a walk into the courtroom, shall we? We probably got about 30 minutes or so to really try and get some meat on this now. So let's take it to the courtroom. So Peter goes into court, and based on your knowledge and any information that you may have been given since you've been involved in this case, how confident was Peter that this was just going to get dealt with and he'd be coming home?
Well, Peter had never dealt with the criminal justice system before, so I think he was optimistic that the truth would come out and the jury would believe him and it would be over. He wasn't prepared for, and I don't think his attorney was prepared for the way that this case was going to be presented against him. And Peter did testify in the first trial on his own behalf. But he was convicted, and it got overturned a couple of years later, and he was brought back and then retried in the same jurisdiction. Now, then by this time I got involved with a new attorney, and I think we came very close, I believe, to getting him acquitted. But there was one issue that the jury had that they really misunderstood it, but they interpreted some of the evidence incorrectly, and as a result, that was the determining factor in their decision to convict him again.
You know, the police officer who shot dead Walter Scott in his back.
Yeah.
Has just recently been fortunate enough to meet with a hung jury that sees him walks free from what was an absolute spot-on murder charge. And I'm struggling with how the law, the justice system, deals with victims and perpetrators based on class, race, position, and authority. So, has there been any response from the community as such to confirm that they don't feel easy with this conviction?
Not too much up in the local area. I think all of the publicity and news reporting in that area was very negative towards Peter. So I think that
what was it that Peter did, or how was it that Peter lived that made him so disliked in his local community?
I don't know, just the way that the police and the prosecution portrayed him in the trial, as this evil monster who killed his wife, and So I think everybody in the community has bought into that, and so he doesn't have an awful lot of support from the immediate community around where he lived. He does have a group of supporters that feel like I do, that this was a big injustice, but it's tough getting heard.
It's one of the things that we come across quite often when we're doing a show like this, is how difficult it is to get a momentum of support going in order to try and stop. It's almost as if once the verdict has been given, once somebody's been found guilty, it's almost as if everybody's ready to wash their hands in it and say, well, it's that old, well, he must have done something wrong for him to be found guilty. And people find it totally difficult to believe that the justice system can be so corrupt. Now, bearing in mind that, people that do this type of thing tend to have a behavior pattern that supports that, has there been any other negative handlings of the officers that were involved in Peter's case in any others?
Well, I've never worked on any other cases up in that jurisdiction, so I can't say directly whether there is or not. But it certainly seems rather obvious in this case that there was some misconduct going on, and if they get away with it once, they're likely to do it again.
So Peter now goes to court. He's been charged with murder. They're pouring out this evidence. You said that he gave evidence for himself. He got up on the stand himself.
Yeah, in the first trial, yes.
So, when you witness a prosecution and a defense, was there any reports that were given immediately that said, hang on a minute, this guy just wasn't really represented well?
No, not initially, no. But if you look at the transcript of the trial and some of the things that were done or not done, it was pretty clear to me.
Do me a for instance. Give me a couple of things that just stood straight out when you first saw those transcripts as to how his defense let him down.
Well, the first. The most crucial thing, I think, was the fact that they had an independent pathologist who was willing to come in and testify that this was, in fact, a drowning and not a suffocation, and they never called him to testify. That's what jumped out at me. And then I'm trying to think what some of the other issues were. One of the issues which was involved was the police went back to the lake scene, I think, the next day, and they collected some items that had kind of collected on the shoreline, and then I think they believed that they'd come out of the truck when the truck was being pulled out of the water, or it floated out of the back, or what have you. And amongst those items was a pair of hiking boots, like blue and tan hiking boots. And of course, we know from other witnesses and Peter himself that he was just in his stocking feet when he came out of the water. So the police just assumed that these hiking boots were Peter's. But yet, Peter says, no, they're not my boots. And in the truck, when they did the inventory of the truck, and they even took some pictures, there was a pair of brown boots in the truck. And Peter told the lead investigator that he was wearing brown hiking boots, work boots, not blue and tan sneakers like they found. But they didn't do it. They didn't do anything at all with those. But the ones on the shoreline had some burdocks in them. So again, that kind of supported their position that, yeah, he was wearing these sneakers when he assaulted her up at the house. But the thing about the sneakers was the burdocks were clinging to the inside of the tongue. which means that he couldn't have been wearing them at the time. But Peter says they weren't even his boots. But unfortunately, in the first trial, his attorney thought it would be beneficial for him to admit that they were his. So he had Peter testify that they were in fact his when they weren't, and I think that was a huge mistake, because he basically told Peter to lie about something, and Peter took his attorney's advice.
Once you start, and the unfortunate thing is, once you start to lie, and you get exposed as telling lies, it actually it becomes absolutely, totally, irretrievably difficult for you, because the prosecution has always got you in a corner.
Yeah, absolutely.
Nobody can believe anything that you say anymore. So why would your defense prompt you to lie? And if they did, why hasn't that been challenged?
That's a good question.
Because for me, has anybody asked the defense lawyer why he asked Peter to lie?
I don't think so. He's unfortunately, it could probably still do that, but unfortunately, he's been disbarred.
He has been disbarred.
He's been disbarred since this happened. Yeah.
And what was the reasons behind? Do you mind me asking? What was the reasons behind his disbarment?
I don't remember. I have the decision someplace in my file, but I can't remember.
So there's already evidence that he's an incompetent defense lawyer, at the very least,
he was,
if not corrupt.
He wasn't very competent. He just kind of went through the motions.
This didn't just go to trial once, did it?
Say again?
This didn't just go to trial one time, did it?
I went 3 times.
Okay, so let's take the second trial, for example. What went against him in the second trial?
Everything was going for him in the second trial. But unfortunately, going back, his attorney at the time was really going after the police and their misconduct. And I think he was making some good points. But then when the jury got the case, they went to deliberate, there was an item of evidence. Actually, it was the police evidence log that got introduced and received into evidence. And during deliberations, the jury came out and they asked the court, the judge, if they could consider one particular page in that document. And without giving it any thought, the judge said, yeah, it's in evidence. But unfortunately, the page they were looking at was a page. Actually, it was an evidence submission form that was drafted by the lead investigator, which hypothesized his theory about and his interpretation of what Patty's diaries said. And his interpretation was that that she was in fear of her life from Peter, and the jury considered that without knowing the real truth behind the diaries, and unfortunately they used that in their decision to convict Peter. We talked to some of the jurors afterwards, and we told them that this was a state police submission evidence submission form, and they thought that this document had been authored by the state police at the lab. But when they learned it had been authored by the lead investigator, they said, well, if we'd known that, we never would have convicted him.
They said that?
They did say that.
Wow.
They did say that because they assumed that form, that submission form, had been authored by the state police, so they gave it a lot more credibility. But a lot of negative stuff came out about the lead investigator in the second trial, and they told us later that, gee, if we had known that he was the one that authored that document, we never would have convicted Peter. That's how close we came, and that was one of the reasons that the second trial came back on appeal as well.
But then you go one step further, and this went to trial a third time.
Yeah, actually, in the second trial also, we did call our own forensic pathologist, the one that they had consulted with initially, and I thought he did a great job. He had great credentials, great experience. His testimony went well, and to this day, I can't understand why. When you get two experts who have differing opinions, to me that's reasonable doubt. But despite his testimony, they still found Peter guilty.
Do you think that part of the reason that they found Peter guilty is they just wanted to find him guilty?
Well, I think so. Like I said, this is a small community. I think everybody on that jury probably knew that he'd been convicted before, and they don't want to see him walk free, so they're doing whatever they can to make sure he gets convicted again. That's part of this problem with a high-profile murder case in a small community. Everybody knows about it. They've already made an opinion, and sometimes jurors aren't always honest when they're asked if if they know anything about the case or if they've formed any opinions. So we asked for a change of venue, and that was denied. And then the second trial gets overturned as well, and he comes back for a third trial. Now he gets assigned a third attorney, a very competent attorney. I've worked with him before. He had a little bit different.
Is this when you got on board?
No, I was on board before the second one.
Right.
But the attorney that got assigned to the third trial kept me on board for that one as well. And I had worked with him on other cases, so I knew he was a good attorney. He would do his job, and he had a little different approach than the other attorney, but I thought he did an adequate job. But Peter gets convicted a third time.
Okay. Getting convicted for a crime that you don't believe that you committed just once is heartbreaking.
Yeah.
So getting convicted a second time when you know you're innocent must be excruciatingly crushing.
No doubt.
How did Peter feel after he was found guilty again for the third time?
Well, like I said, he was crushed. He was devastated, and he still is. He has trouble coping from day to day, knowing that he's an innocent man and he's been convicted. There are times when he tells us he just wants to give up, but he doesn't. And we try to keep encouraging him, despite all the downfalls and disappointments we've had along the way. And I just don't know where we can go from here.
What's life in jail been like for Peter over these years?
It's difficult. He's in a maximum security prison in a place called Attica. It's kind of a nationally known prison in upstate New York. I've been up to visit him a couple times. He always has a pretty positive attitude when I'm there, but it's a tough life.
It is. It's a very tough life, and jail is not the easiest place for you to be able to get yourself together and your thoughts, especially when you're convicted of a crime that you didn't commit. What's his relationships like with fellow inmates?
He gets along pretty well. Actually, he's I'm trying to think what he told me last time he was doing. He was doing some type of he was helping some inmates.
So it's almost like he's mentoring.
Doing some consulting work or referral work to help them with their cases. I can't remember exactly what it was he told me. But he seemed to be like what he's doing, and I guess I think a lot of the inmates were liked him, and a lot of the guards liked him. So that was making life a little bit easier.
Has he got much hope of getting a fourth trial? Do you hold up much hope of getting another trial for him?
I hate to give up hope, and I know he's right on the fence. He wants to be hopeful, but he also knows realistically that it may never happen, and I realize that too. And I'd like it to happen. I just don't know how we can make it happen. We've still been consulting with a couple of attorneys who may be willing to do what they can. But our options are pretty limited now after the third conviction, and his appeal had been denied.
It's a bit of a steep hill to climb once you've been convicted 3 times, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Is there any precedents, any cases that you know of where someone who's been convicted as many times has still had recourse to appeal again and been successful?
It's not quite the same case, but I worked on another murder case here that lasted almost as long, about 14 years. It was a husband accused of killing his wife. There was no body. He was convicted twice. One conviction was thrown out. The second one came back on appeal. The third trial was a mistrial, and he took a big jump in the fourth trial and decided to have what they call a bench trial, which is just there's no jury; it's just the judge, and he was acquitted. It's kind of an unprecedented case that went to trial 4 times, and he ended up getting acquitted.
So you can't hold out hope, right?
Yeah, there's always hope for something. I'm not sure what'll happen. I'm hoping something can happen.
This case has got a lot of attention on social media. And do you feel that the sense of it's almost like the pendulum swinging, isn't it? What do you have to do in order to get this case reheard again? What's the precedent? What's the outline? What have you got to bring?
Yeah, I'm not sure what our next step is going to be. A while back, I wrote a letter to the state attorney general's office, and basically my information fell on deaf ears.
I feel totally out of my depth here, because this is where Dr. David Rumey, comes out all on his own. He has his knowledge of prosecutorial misconduct and what to do next and where to go next. It's so vital for a case like this.
Yeah,
it's a real.
I'd love to talk. Yeah, I'd love to talk to him, because I do feel that there is some misconduct involved in this case, both on the part of the police and the prosecutor.
Well, I'm going to try and find a way to put you in touch with him, so that we can do just that. So now his kids, we're coming to that time. We've probably got about 10 minutes, maybe 15 minutes more. And I do want to try and get as much more out as we can. I don't want to finish this show and think, oh, we could have done that, or we could have said that. His children are a bit older, or a lot older now than they were at the time. How are they coping with all of this now?
They have mixed feelings. I know his oldest daughter is still very supportive of her dad, but she really doesn't want to get involved anymore. She, in the beginning, she wrote letters to the judge, and she posted stuff on Facebook, and all very supportive of her dad. And I think she's just at wit's end as to what more she can do. And the other 2 younger ones, I don't hear much about them. I think they may be living with his dad, uh, uh, and going.
Okay. So only one of the three. Do any of the children actually think he's guilty?
I don't think so. I don't think the two younger ones were old enough to know whether he was or wasn't. Uh, Only from what they heard and read about in the trial and in the coverage and like I said in the social media. Uh, so I don't know exactly. I don't hear much from them myself. So I really don't know what their positions are.
It'd be really good if, um, you know, if you can get some ex-jurors who are on the trial, who are on the case, to rethink, to relook at what it was that they convicted over, and to allow them to see it from another angle, and maybe get a positive statement from them as to whether or not they would have returned a different verdict had they been a bit more knowledgeable.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that would help or not. I mean, it would be nice to know that if they'd be willing to sit down and discuss the case. I'd certainly be receptive to that, but I don't know what their information at this point in time would do to help. If we were granted another trial, maybe it would help, but I'm just not sure where to turn. I've never done this before. I even wrote to the, one of the things we have here in the States is a couple of innocence projects.
Yeah, we know of the innocence projects.
And I'm just not getting a lot of a response there.
Again, as I said, when this, I'll put you in touch with Dr. David Ramey, and we can actually see where that goes from there. As for you, how are you coping with all of this? I mean, is this something that you're getting paid to stay on the case for, or you?
No, I'm not. I'm only staying on because I feel it's a huge injustice, and so all of my time that I spend doing things like this is all my own time, just because I feel strongly that he was falsely convicted of a crime that never happened. And I've had a couple other ones. In fact, I just had some good news a couple of days ago. A young lady, I worked on her case about 6 years ago. She was accused of killing her 2-year-old son, and both the attorney and I felt very strongly that she had nothing to do with the death of her son, and everything pointed to her boyfriend. And her appeal came through 2 days ago, and we were optimistic that she would at least be granted a new trial, but they went above and beyond that, and they threw out the whole thing.
Wow.
Based on the same arguments that we had made throughout the trial, they totally agreed with the defense position that the jury should not have convicted her based on the weight of the evidence.
Well, so that holds out a bit of hope.
So that was amazing. So she's getting released from prison,
wow.
and she had 3 other children. So we're optimistic that she'll be reunited with them before the holidays.
Well, there's a positive ending for one story, even if I haven't got one for Peter just yet.
I was really impressed with this young lady. She was a single mom raising 4 kids, and unlike a lot of single moms who would reach out to public assistance, she had a full-time job, working nights to raise her family, and I just know she didn't kill her son, and we know who did, but unfortunately he was granted immunity to testify against her, and unfortunately he was the killer.
Wow. So when are you due to see Peter next?
When will I see Peter next? I'm not sure yet. I don't have anything scheduled. probably sometime after the holidays, he'll want me to come up and see him again, and I'll go up. I think that we have another attorney we've been consulting with, and we're trying to decide if there's enough evidence that we can get this thing reopened somehow, and maybe get him another trial.
It's obviously to get another trial, you've got to actually come up with evidence or produce evidence that has not been used in any of the previous trials. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So do you have anything like that?
Well, we think we might. We just gotta develop it, and Peter has indicated that he thinks he has some information. He wants to talk to the attorney about it. So we're gonna. I don't know exactly what that is yet, but we'll wait and see what the attorney says and take it from there.
It's a real travesty when you have an individual, and I really wish that we can open it up, and I hope at the very least, by doing this show and raising the awareness on this particular case, that people will be able to hear just how wrong this is, how obviously wrong this is, and how there is no real proof. Because for me, to convict somebody of murder, you have to be fundamentally sure to the core of your very being, right, that they must have done this, But for me, so far, there is not even a case for murder here.
No. And if back to the police theory that he killed her up at this burdock bush up behind their pool, there was absolutely no evidence that there was any type of struggle or dragging that occurred at that location. This was early spring. The ground was muddy. Certainly if there had been a life and death struggle, there would have been the ground would have been torn up. There would have been some evidence of a struggle or sod torn up or drag marks on her clothing, something. And there was nothing like that.
But also, if he'd killed her at the back of the house and dragged her around there to get her back into the vehicle or whatever, there would have been evidence of a struggle, drag marks or the sorts.
Yeah, absolutely. And there was nothing like that. I mean, nothing at all. Her clothing.
It's very rare in modern times for forensics to be so non-existent, and yet such a decision made with the lack of. And I mean, I'm just struggling to see how they were able to present this as murder and get away with it.
I know.
I can't be any more dumbstruck than you and Peter, and I think it's very difficult to be able to understand what could be possibly going through his mind right now as he looks at his life as it's panned out over the last few years, as he misses the involvement and the everyday interaction with his children. He misses watching them grow, go to school and adapt and progress in their lives. And obviously this has cost him everything, because I would imagine he's also lost his business in all of this.
Oh yeah, he paid his own way for the first trial, and it cost him all he had. And then the second, the third trial were, the county paid for his attorney there, but he lost everything as a result of the first trial.
And I suppose there's no amount of I'm sorry's and compensations that's going to be able to give him back that sort of life, is it?
No.
Okay, so what next for you, David?
Well, I'm just going to try to stay optimistic. I got other cases I'm working on, but Peter's case is always going to be on the back of my mind, and if something needs to be done, and if I can help with that, I'll be ready and willing to do that.
we're going to try and over the next 3 minutes. We just want to try and round this up. Is there anything else that you want to add? Any information that you want to give? Anything that you want to share that we haven't gone over, or you might want to just go over again, just to give the audience an understanding of where we are and what can be done?
I don't know. Like I said, there's a lot of issues that I have with this case involving a number of different aspects. There's the issue with the coat, the issue with the hairs, the issue with the burdocks, the issue with the boots. They all have their own independent problems that I have as far as how they were handled, how they were interpreted, how they were used against him. And each of those cases, I strongly believe that there may very well have been some police misconduct in their effort to convict Peter. And it reminds me of a quote I learned a long time ago from a French philosopher from the 1700s, and he stated that when it came to false convictions involving tampering with evidence, he said there is no crueler tyranny than that which is perpetrated under the shield of the law in the name of justice.
It's a real irony that those who are elected, employed to serve and protect, can get it so wrong that other people's lives are permanently affected.
I think the police in this case, I think they firmly believe that Peter killed Patty, but they didn't have the evidence to prove it, so they set out to make it happen, and they justified it in the interest of justice, even though it was wrong.
And that's the real sad thing. All right, well, David, listen,
it is.
I just think that it's so sad when so many lives have been made to suffer over and over and over again, because the children lost a mother, Peter lost a wife, and they've had to endure three trials holding out for hope that justice will be seen to be done. And each time it's kicked them back in the teeth and knocked them back. And so people are going to be forced to be believing to a degree for there to be three trials and you be found guilty three times. There must be some truth in that evidence, in that conviction.
Yeah, that's the belief that people have when they hear that. Okay, we got 36 jurors that found him guilty, so he must be guilty.
And he must be finding it even harder to try and get anybody to believe that he's not.
Right. Yeah. Each time it's that much harder. You're right.
How strong is he mentally in going forward?
He comes and goes. There are times when he's has a really strong attitude. There are other times when he's kind of on the fence and wants to give up. But the supporters that we have try to encourage him to keep his head up and stay positive, regardless of how difficult it is. And so far he's still been able to do that.
Well, from here at World Jam Global Radio Issues Today, we take our hats off to you, especially in the knowledge that you've been doing this unpaid for the sheer reason that you believe him to be innocent. Totally commend you for that. I take my hat off to you, David Beers. Commend you 100%, wholeheartedly, for your endeavour, your integrity and your hard work. And we stand alongside you. We pray that there will be a breakthrough, a real breakthrough, for the family of Peter and his children who've been left to the loss of their mother, and then the loss of their father. An eternal grief, because They're the ones that having to walk around knowing that everybody else believes that daddy killed mummy.
Yep.
And that must be a hard thing to have to live with.
For sure.
I just want to thank you for coming on the show today.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you doing the show, and you're performing a nice service, and I'm glad that you considered this case to use on your show.
Listen, if there's anything else that we can do anywhere along down the line to support you, to create more awareness, to advertise or bring to light any other information, please don't hesitate to contact us. We're friends now. We're family now. You're part of the issues. You're part of the Issues Today family. That's what happens when you're indoctrinated. And again, I just want to thank you for appearing with us today and sharing Peter's story and giving us another opportunity to show just how accidents happen and people can make the wrong decisions. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate your all the work you did and all your prayers for Peter. I continue to pray for him myself, and we know that God works in mysterious ways, and I'm going to remain optimistic that he's going to come through for us.
Well, absolutely. Well, David Beers, all I can say once again is thank you for joining us on Issues Today. It's been a pleasure. The pleasure's been all ours, and we look forward to hearing from you again real soon.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. From now, we are out of here. Don't forget, you can join me next Saturday night for another edition of Issues Today on World Jam Global Radio, where I've got 3 guests. Our treasured good friend Alex Salazar will be with us.
Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for
Retired Sergeant Cheryl Ford Dorsey will be with us. And police activist, blogger Davey Tara will be with us.
It was all about
when we talk about
do or die. I had to.
life in the Trump lane.
I was too young and foolish to stay in.
What next?
I learned my lessons in the street.
Police brutality
Man, I couldn't beat. I was good with
under Trump law.
quick on my feet. I was
That's going to be a very interesting show indeed.
all over the street.
You can also join me tomorrow morning for another Wake Up Everybody Sunday Gospel show. That's Church Before Church, 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. That's GMT UK time.
Spent it all in jail. Trying to cope with this living.
Sorry, it's Davey Vara. Did I say Davey Tara? It's Davey Vara, I'm being reminded by my producer.
For my crime. Already did my time.
But yeah, we'll have Alex Salazar, Cheryl Ford Dorsey, and Davey Vara. What next? Life in the Trump lane.
My time.
Next Saturday night, normal time, 6 p.m. GMT. That's 1 p.m. EST.
So much.
And I think that's about 10 a.m. Pacific.
I'm not proud of what I had to do. That's why I'm telling my story to you and you.
I want to thank David Beers once again
Admit, I was doing all kinds of
for sharing this story with us.
sit back.
Accidents happen,
I know the life I used to live.
and I honestly believe that
I
the
was young and done. My brain was
jury,
the real,
the police,
but I was
and his local community
Billy the Kid.
have definitely got it wrong,
The real Terminator.
and an innocent man
Schwarzenegger.
is rotting in jail.
Like a real alligator. Especially
If you're listening to this broadcast and
The opening statements
you've
are
got
going on.
time on your hands,
Be facing life in prison.
look up this story of Peter Wozniak. Write a letter to
my time.
the authorities in that local area. Petition,
Already did my time.
contact the local media and newspapers, and let your thoughts and feelings be known.
Time. Paid for my crime. Already did.
My name is Kervin Julien. This has been Issues Today on World Jam Global Radio. We're out of here.
Already did my time. I paid for my crime.
It's gonna be a storm around here.